Lalitha ma'am, can you give the general instruction to the audience?
Yes, sir. So, good evening, everyone. We are here in the 22nd webinar hosted by English Language Teachers Association of India. To go on with the general instructions, if you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A function to submit it. The moderator will address the questions at the end of the session. Please feel free to use the chat function to share comments or engage with other attendees. But please keep the conversation relevant to the webinar topic only. We encourage active participation, but please be mindful of not interrupting the speaker in between. And we have some query regarding certificate and all that. So feedback link will be shared after the Q&A session. Please mind it that you fill the feedback link, which will be provided at the end of the session. I once again welcome the resource person, the moderator, and all the participants to this 122nd webinar, which is hosted by English Language Teachers Association of India on the topic, Social Media's Impact on Anglophone Literature, Insights from American and Indian Perspectives. Before we listen to the resource person, I would like to get your opinion on the impact of social media on literature. Just mention one significant impact which is created by social media on literature and languages in general in the chat box, along with your name and the place you belong to. Participants, please. Participants, can you please give your views? The impact created by social media on literature and languages in general. Yes, it has created an impact towards the style of writing. It has improved the standard of language in general. The use of language has changed because of social media. Definitely, we can say so. It has ensured the gradual decline of reading habits among students. That's why that Read India initiative has been taken by ELTAI. One more insightful thing, it has impacted our behavior and psychology in general, redefined our language norms. Thank you very much, participants, for your overwhelming response. I repeat that if you have any queries or if you wish to ask any question, you please write your queries in the Q&A box, in the chat box, so that all the questions can be dealt with at the end of the session. Before we get down to business and understand the impact of social media on Anglophone literature, let's get acquainted with the scintillating world of ELTAI through the promo video showcasing the events and activities and initiatives ELTAI engages itself into. I request Kevin to please play the video. Thank you for the video. I believe that those who are not associated with ELTAI after going through this video will consider becoming a part of this vigorously dynamic association. Let me now introduce you to our esteemed moderator who will be moderating this webinar, Dr. Nishevita Jayendran. Dr. Nishevita Jayendran is an assistant professor at the Center of Excellence in Teacher Education, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She teaches and consults on literature, language education, critical and cultural literacies, material and curriculum development, creative writing, and discourse analysis. Madam has developed MOOCs on pedagogies of literature for secondary, higher secondary, and college teachers in India, and has published in the areas of literary criticism and critical methodologies. As a researcher, she specializes in qualitative methodologies, multi-methods, and mixed method approaches, with an emphasis on narrative inquiry, textual criticism, critical discourse analysis, and case study. She is also fluent in ethnographic studies. Her research and publications span the domains of world literature, representation and cultural studies, curriculum studies, and critical peace education. I welcome you, ma'am, and request you to take charge of this session. Madam, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Welcome. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for today, Professor John Shanahan. Professor John is the Associate Dean and Professor of English at DePaul University in Chicago. He earned his BPhil in English and Philosophy at the University of Pittsburgh and his PhD in English at Rutgers University. And he joined the faculty of DePaul in 2002. Professor John specializes in literature about science and technology, science fiction, and the digital humanities. He has published widely on topics ranging from early modern drama to contemporary science fiction. He's also the co-principal investigator of DePaul's Reading Chicago project, with support from lyricists and the US National Endowment for the Humanities. In today's talk, titled Social Media's Impact on Anglophone Literature, Insights from American and Indian Perspectives, Professor John proposes to examine how some contemporary novelists in America and South Asia have engaged with and been changed by the competition with critical media, social media narratives. It is therefore with great pleasure and in anticipation of a stimulating evening that I welcome and invite Professor John to this webinar. John, the floor is all yours. We look forward to hearing you. And thank you for that, for agreeing to this, in fact, at a very early hour of the morning for you, I believe.
Sure.
Thank you for this.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Professor Jandran. It's an honor to speak with you all. I'm really looking forward to this. As you heard, I work on literature about science and technology, and I will admit that I'm a bit of a I'm improvising a little bit about the South Asian connections, though I've been reading the literature of the area for decades, so we'll see. Anyway, I'll start the share, and let's people can let me know if this is working. So okay, so are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So let me tell you a little bit about what we'll be going through. So first of all, talking a little bit about how reading is social. The reason why I call it 2.0 is that reading has always been social, but of course it's different in recent decades. Literature and literary criticism in an age of social media. I will explain some examples of tools people are using in the digital humanities, especially because social media is sticky in lots of technical ways. Third, we'll look at the way English and multilingualism shows up in social media and some of its effects on literature. And finally, the case study section, the longest one, will look at some authors, both American and South Asian, and kind of talk through the issues involved. A bit of a caveat, I'll say right at the beginning, this is not going to be a lament, although I think all of us that are teachers know that students are reading differently. I have to admit that I'm reading differently sometimes. You know, students are not emerging now reading in depth, print only. So, but I'm actually quite an optimist about the way social media interacts with print fiction. To remind you too, oops. Okay, I hope you can still see my screen or my slides. Yes. Okay, that this is not a new issue. People have complained about the fact of media intruding into the immediacy of our worlds for a long time. Just as one that I could choose, here's almost a century ago, and I'll let you look at the picture that, you know, Punch magazine was already lamenting the fact that ticker tape was standing in between people having face-to-face conversations. But social media is different, as we all know. The last 20 years have made things a quite different environment. So I'm not going to read all of it, but I want you to take a look at this. And I really highly recommend William Davies' recent essay in New Left Review about this. Social media is so potent because, as he puts it in the middle that I've quoted here, the key condition for this is the digital platform, which has ushered in a new era of public participation in which recognition of status is never adequately achieved by anyone, so injustice feels ubiquitous. Everyone that's sent a post or had a Facebook update or something, you can never have enough likes, right? There could always be more people who could, you know, upvote it or something. And so people are now conditioned to look for the little dopamine hits of affirmation. And since no one can ever feel fully affirmed, we get the kind of self-pitying that goes on even among, you know, the most connected and wealthy in our societies. But that's to say, I want to have everyone pause about this. This was said almost a decade ago, and I think it's become even more true. And I'll say something about this in a minute, but this is Bob Stein, a theorist thinking at the Institute for the Future of the Book. And he wrote, "In the future, we'll think of a book less as a physical object than as a place to congregate. this has proved, like I said, true for these kinds of reasons. Let me just give you a few examples. There's fan fiction. Many of your students, maybe you yourself, write on using Wattpad, or maybe you leave long reviews on Goodreads. Maybe you're listening to books during public transportation visits. People leave likes and ratings and things like that. So reading is all around us, and it comes in multiple modalities. Reading is increasingly social and discontinuous, and this is part of the reading 2.0 here. We dip in and out of stories, we add piecemeal to narratives. Many people like fan fiction, either reading it, commenting on it, writing it themselves. And this has happened throughout history. Keep in mind, from the Mahabharata, to Homer, people have accumulated communal pieces of writing and orality. So what this, and this is where it matters for social media, is interactivity. And I won't go into all of the details now, but I hope if you've not ever read Michael Fried's Art and Objecthood, the idea that's behind it, the thing that so structures and has made it landmark work of criticism, is what to do with artworks that include the beholder. This presents a special problem in social media, as we'll see. What does it mean when every work is expected to be participatory? When the experience of art is cast as a species of user design? How does this change literature? So some of the other ways you'll see it around you are, again, commenting, post-press literature, so-called. This is a lot of scholars are writing about it now, the idea of self-publishing or small batch press and print on demand and things that Amazon platforms are allowing people to do. But it also means, and the pictures in the bottom right are a reminder here, that many people are using literature as a kind of bibliotherapy. It's not so much about depth of reading as depth of emotion, regardless of what you're reading, right? So people make lists like the one at the bottom here, books that have emotionally destroyed me. These become long memes in so-called book talk. The great book on this of recent years is Mark McGurl's, called Everything and Less, the novel in the age of Amazon. He pointed out that, according to Amazon, all fiction is genre fiction. What he means by that is that fiction is increasingly narrowcast to particular publics who want the same kind of experience repeatedly. At the same time, data is entering into all of this. So this is, I won't go into details here, but just a reminder that publishers of print fiction are doing what showrunners and people for writing for TV have known for decades, which is, put a body at the beginning or a sex scene at the beginning of the work because you need to hook readership, because they have statistics like the ones you're seeing in the middle about how soon people turn the pages, or how many chapters they see, or how many episodes they watch, or parts of episodes before they fall off. And so this has changed the way people conceive writing. At the same time, and this is just an example of a screenshot that I've had my students do in a class, which is to use an API to write to Twitter, right? This is just a kind of program interface to be able to pull data out of social media. And for instance, use it as a keyword. I was using the novel Cloud Atlas, it doesn't matter which work it is, but you could actually, unlike following a hashtag, actually get into the guts of the story by seeing thousands of related social media about people talking about a particular work. So that's making English classes, at least at DePaul, this is a picture I took in my classroom, much more mediated. It's no longer simply a discussion around print books all flipping to the same page, but often we're interacting in different ways with the works. Okay, so I'm going to be very brief in this project tour. I want to say a little bit about what I've been doing as a digital humanities scholar before getting into examples much more close to what you're all doing. So again, I'll be quick here, but I want to show some of the possibilities. So this is taken from my project I created with a computer scientist called Reading Chicago Reading. If you're interested in the details, we have a long article in Digital Humanities Quarterly from a few years ago. There's a website associated with it. These are the people involved. Myself and my two colleagues. We have a lot of support from students and people at the Chicago Public Library, which is a huge system. And we've had grant funding to help. We have a lot of different kinds of data. And so again, for this talk, I won't get into the details here, but it might involve data about the city, library book data, archives, and finally the social media. And that's what's important here. What this project is about is the fact that the city of Chicago, like many cities in the US and around the world, pick a book and essentially assign it to the entire city to read. So library branches will have many copies of the work, and it becomes a way of trying to set up a citywide discussion. So for instance, since we have, and here's a list of some of the recent books chosen, again, getting a little older, these are some examples. What's notable about these books is some of them are set in Chicago and some of them are not. So what that does, and to go back to this one, is that gives us a chance to actually have data about readers in a city reading about their own city or reading works about someone else. So if you have the social media involved, for instance, Goodreads reviews, our team has scraped 30,000 and just over Goodreads reviews. We also have Twitter data, several thousand related to this program. And it's things like, you'll see that what I've screenshot here of the kind of example of people talking about these works, okay? What you can do with this is align it with the fact of the neighborhoods of Chicago. Chicago is notoriously segregated, Black, white, and Latino. And I won't go into the details here, but you know, the city can be studied this way. And since we have data about books that are related to Chicago, we can, you know, ask questions about it. So again, I'll go quickly here, but what you're seeing here is the kinds of maps that can be made through the social media, through checkout data. This is on a loop, and it's just showing the checkout patterns of one of the books over several months. Obviously, some neighborhoods read it more than others, and that's an interesting fact in itself. And so, you know, some neighborhoods are more likely to check out books about Chicago, and some are not. And that has a story too. Because we can also do what social media is good at, which is find ways to link it to positivity and negativity scores. This is what marketers do in communications realm with their social media. We can do it about literary works too, and potentially make up maps associating works with positivity and negativity with particular words in the books. So again, this is very Chicago specific, so I won't get into too much of it. But I wanted to show you the kinds of tools. But this is more relevant for this group mixed from all around the world. And it's about the way English and the Anglophone functions in this. And so, again, there's a lot on the screen, so I just want to kind of put out some examples here. So, for instance, I'm always kind of struck by Derrida's point in his monolingualism book, that he points out that languages do not exist as whole numbers, right? It's not like 0 or 1, all or nothing. People know one language at least, though, as Derrida was, you know, very famous for saying, you know, this language which is mine is also not mine. All of us, you know, share something that is a public language that is, larger than us for all the reasons we know from post-structuralism. But because of that, that presents an interesting situation for speakers, especially because the way people are consuming narrative now. So let me point you to the second paragraph here. People use piecemeal and consume piecemeal, even languages they do not speak. In other words, they're in the ether. It might be among your students that, some snippets or based on assignments, some particular parts of English, might be parts of French, but it might be also, little snippets of K-pop and things like that, we all know. At the same time, because of the ubiquity of subtitles, and Netflix, among others, has been very important about this, people are much more willing to hear and see works in other languages and listen to it. And young people, and I'm the parent of a teenager here in the US, so I know, will even watch works in English with subtitles on. And so it's becoming a very common idea to think through while listening, even languages you don't speak. So, I've given some examples. One, a comic example down in the bottom right that, we'll see. And so that's just for comic effect. But, the statistics lately are pretty interesting. Even the big hit RRR has been responsible, as recent reporting has shown. There is now more Telugu content on Netflix than, say, German. So it's displaced for amount of possibilities, even some of the European languages. At the same time, as when I saw it on Netflix, it's in Hindi dub, and so this kind of fluctuation among different languages is an interesting phenomenon. Things like Hum de Kenge, being sung on campuses all around the world, not just India anymore. It's become a slogan. So people are, they may not know the original, but they might know translations, or they may be singing along in the same way they might sing to songs in different languages that they may know better or worse. So for English, this is the part that's, especially interesting to me and kind of inspired by Snigdha Poonam's book, Dreamers, about this. And so I'll start with that. She points out, and this is, quoting from a review, the version of English they speak, she's talking about, the aspirational young people around her. The version of English they speak with colleagues, waiters, customer care executives, will define the future of the language in this country, and in fact, the future of English worldwide, Poonam writes. With India expected to have the largest number of English speakers in the world in the next 10 years, overtaking the US, the English they speak will be the English of the future. That's a very important point. And again, common sense for you in India and elsewhere, but for scholars in the US, and it's something that we have to increasingly take account of. And what it does is, to me, Poonam's point moves us beyond the kind of, Rushdie and post-Rushdie debates over Indian English and, all or nothing, or regional versus English. And so it's an interesting moment to get beyond what we could call deficit models, but also it's a challenge to ethno-nationalist models of competence, a single language that should be defined from above and imposed on people through standards of correctness. And I put on the screen here, you'll see, to me, some of the more interesting recent works that complicate English. To me, Jeet Thale's Book of Chocolate Saints is probably the richest Anglophone English novel, in decades, I have to say. Just the density of the work itself, the variety of language is striking, and I know nothing like it since Rushdie's early works. Gitanjali Shree's Tomb of Sand, I know, is originally in Hindi, but there's been a lot of commentary by Daisy Rockwell in translating it and trying to capture the flavor of the kind of roving Hindi in the English translation, which I find pretty interesting. And so I'm happy to hear from people, about that too. There's a lot of interesting interviews she's given lately. But let's dive into some case studies. It will make it more concrete to look at examples of people. So, of course, unavoidable would be Chetan Bhagat, the writer who everyone does not want to talk about and yet can't avoid talking about. To me, he's interesting in a lot of different ways. At the same time, there's been a lot of good critical writing, including I highly recommend on the right Ragini Srinivasan's recent essay in comparative literature. Again, this is only a few months it's been out, but it's a really comprehensive reading of the way he fights with English in a larger circuit of language politics. To me, Bhagat's interesting for what he says, and I've quoted it at the top. I'm not competing with other authors, but with apps, video games, with movies and TV. He's an example of an early adopter of some of the authors I'm going to give examples following from the US. He's an early adopter of what, he doesn't call it this, but I would say kind of autofiction, the self-novelization, where you put out a story as one part of a larger circuit of what we can call transmedia properties. What this means is that any story is an intellectual property marker laid down. It's sort of like, a way of staking a claim on a little meme worth of storyline, or even we could say a loss leader. This is the sort of one thing you give away to try to get people hooked or something, right? A loss leader for other products and purposes. And so what I see him doing early in the 21st century, and that so many writers now do in the age of Amazon as a publishing platform, he's doing what writers who write in this kind of middle brow or simpler English are trying to do, which is capture an intellectual property to marketize, to monetize. So, Saba Imtiaz would be a good example. Doing Bridget Jones in Karachi, You're Killing Me, which then gets remade as a Bollywood film. Anjali Chauhan's Zoya Factor, but also ones that have made it into the higher critical realm, like Adiga's White Tiger, pretty much all of the works of Mohsin Hamid and others. And so we see a pattern here of people using stories in simpler English as a way to try to capture a mode that can then move across different media forms. These novels are written almost like screenplays, we could say. They're waiting to be picked up and optioned. So for Bhagat, again, I've taught Half Girlfriend in a course recently, and students like it. It's simple, it's relatable, it's always an upward mobility tale of some kind of way. So there's interest in the story. But Srinivasan points out some interesting things. I've just obviously highlighted a little bit. One of the things she points out, which is interesting, is that if we leave aside the by now overfamiliar smattering of words like yar, bye, and ha, that accent Bhagat's text to signal a English-speaking milieu, his novels are strikingly spare in their incorporation of any vernacular. Instead, they masquerade as vernacular. So like White Tiger, which has a fantasy version of writing in English and not writing in English. These are works that Wolkowitz in a recent book has called Born Translated. So they're like illusions of other languages inside the Anglophone. These are interesting, interesting works and pull up topics that we as scholars can find purchase on. So I see Bhagat as an example, though he does not call it, as I mentioned, autofiction. This is one of the really signature genres of contemporary American publishing, at least. And autofiction has its roots in a kind of social media. And so here's what I mean by this. Figlerowicz, in a recent work, calls these kinds of writings the novel of infinite storage, right? And Knausgaard's My Struggle, right? If you've seen the thousands of pages of that work, is a good example of this. These are present-day Prousts for our new media world. These authors show a social media-fueled suspicion that, quote, our intimate selves are extremely vulnerable to being accessed and examined by others. This condition is because of the stickiness of social media and the fact that, in principle, things we've posted years ago, maybe, without thinking much, are able to be recalled if someone so chooses. These writers, quote, represent the minutiae of their narrator protagonist's experiences as storable and retrievable to an extent that sometimes defies even these narrators' own desires for such detailed accounts of themselves. Their novels respond to an implied notion of reality as unexpectedly and at times even disempoweringly rife with inerasable traces of their protagonists' lives. It seems as if every person they encounter and every room they enter were the equivalent of a Proustian Madeline, ready to yield extensive knowledge about their pasts and their presents. These are people in these works living in the presentness of social media. So here's to get some examples that I find particularly striking and I've been writing about. One is Tao Lin. He, an American kid born in Taiwan, but raised in the US since he was a child. And he's not one of the people Figlerowicz mentions, but I would say he's a good example of autofiction. And because, quote, behind each surname in its pages, there is not just a fictional, but a real searchable human being. Each act of naming a city, a book, or newspaper is an act of deixis, whose accuracy can be fact-checked and knowledge of which can be freely deepened by anyone who cares to look it up online. And this, if you don't know Tao Lin's works, and the next screen, here's examples of his novels. I'll go back, but what he does is do lightly fictionalized versions of himself. His recent novels are essentially diary entries rewritten with a different name, though it's clearly modeled on his own life and his own family, and rewritten as if it was a novel with, strange, slight changes. At the same time, just to point out another interesting recent American novel, Raven Leilani's Luster, and she's one of the younger authors here, born in 1990. She points out at one point her protagonist is, worried about, finding someone who doesn't have a social media presence, because these people would truly be strangers, right? To not have a profile is now something of a negative, and again, part of our social media presence. So let me just say one other thing about Tao Lin before we get into some of the others. What's interesting about him is not only the autofiction aspect, but he's very symptomatic of our time because, and this is the bottom here, number two, he's also, to use the phrase that's in American social media a lot, doing your own research, do your own research. This is part of, the conspiracy culture fueled by social media. People trying to, find their own self-medications. They distrust elites. They often associated with authoritarian models of politics. But he's also notable because he's, I say, on the alienation spectrum, the gift economy. He's not interested in money from his works. He's interested in a kind of gift culture among different artists. And like many young Americans, really struggling economically, and therefore, also using social media in a kind of generational warfare. There's another example from the Argentinian writer Cardenas, though this book was published in English, but several chapters he used AI to mash up what it looks like. This novel is only a few weeks old in the press, so I just finished it myself recently. So this is why you're looking at actual pictures from my phone of some of what the pages look like. I won't go into the details in the interest of time, but it reads in places like, I say, novelized versions of posts on social media. Okay, so if you take a look, you'll see it's also content about people repurposing videos and doing mashups and response videos and things we're very familiar with. Catherine Lacey is another interesting example, another younger American author, though written some very interesting novels. The Answers, her novel from 2017, to me is the most representative novel of the past decade. What I mean by that is it hits on sort of everything symptomatic of the previous decade. Precarity, the gig economy. It's about a struggling young woman, underemployed, trying to find work. It's definitely into the hashtag Me Too and like gaslighting themes. Mansplaining and many of the things we hear as kind of out there in the social world. It's about surveillance capitalism, about data that people radiate out from their devices. And interestingly, finally, it is what Mark McGurl in his recent writing has termed the billionaire romance. So there's a way that this is it's not a consummated relationship like 50 Shades of Grey or something, but it is a model of someone very wealthy trying to manipulate others through their wealth. There are also, and this is a novel really about social media, and I highly recommend it. This is the only graphic novel to be nominated for the Booker Prize. So Sabrina by Nick Drnaso is a novel about conspiracy culture and social media. And you'll see it's a very sparse visual palette. So it's not anything flashy about the drawing. It is a very deep psychological portrait of people becoming immersed in social media. And so, again, I highly recommend it. And Jennifer Egan, this one, I have 2 slides on this because I'd like to have you think about what's possible, not only when writers engage with social media, but what we as scholars can do with this. So this is a very crowded page you're looking at. So let me explain what's going on here. Jennifer Egan's novel, A Visit from the Goon Squad, which was very celebrated, it's a great novel from 2011, had a character named Lulu. And after that novel came out, she set herself a project to write about this character. And what you're looking at in the bottom left is her way of trying to sketch a story out as a series of tweets. What's interesting is if you look at the top middle is when the New Yorker first put this short story out called Black Box. It was 600, a little over 600 tweets, came out over a period of 2 weeks in the summer of 2012. She wrote it, though, by hand in those little squares to help her concentrate what she was going to capture in each tweet. It was then published in print form in the New Yorker. That would be the picture near the top center. And below that picture of the woman's face is what it looked like on the page in the New Yorker magazine. So it was a series of tiny chapters made of what looked like tweets. Fast forward a decade to her recent novel called The Candy House. Okay, and inside it, and I've taken a picture of what it looks like in the novel, in a chapter called Lulu the Spy, set in the year 2032, is that same story now repurposed again inside of a print novel. So what we're seeing is a remediation issue, right? We've seen a story go from prose from the Goon Squad into handwritten short aphorisms, into tweets, to print, and then repurposed inside of a novel in a different form again. So that's one story. But my previous slide was just about the print remediations of Egan's black box. There's a data story to be told as well, and this is the interesting one for those of you that are interested in digital humanities research, is that every one of those tweets, the 606 of them, has data about it that, again, hard for individuals, without funding sources, and you have to deal with Twitter, now X, to do this. But in principle, every single one of those 600 has some different data about how many people retweeted it, how many people favorited the individual one. And so all of that tells you some interesting things about, what people found interesting, down to the level of essentially sentences. It would be as if this was a short story, every single sentence was numbered, and then you had data about, its uptake, how many people like that sentence rather than a different sentence. See what I mean? And, you can have images in your mind of Roland Barthes' SZ, right, of the numbered sentences in Balzac to kind of do commentary. So here it's been electrified as a social media product. Another example, Fatma Bhutto's Runaways. The novel, I have to say, it's a pot boiler. What I mean by that is it's, a bit melodramatic, kind of over the top, not the most subtle novel. Politically, but what's interesting about it is the fact that it is about young men and women who ultimately find themselves in Syria and Iraq, who have been radicalized by social media. The young people's search for authenticity finds them taking up political views more extreme than they might otherwise run into. Some of these things have become really, legitimately scary and true around us. So like Bhutto's plot or Chetan Bhagat's tone, one can see in QAnon. If you know what this is a conspiracy theory, essentially a kind of Trump fan fiction among right-wing people in the US, filled with memes and conspiracy. But what's notable about it, and many scholars have pointed out, that this kind of conspiracy culture, whether it's in India or in the US, is a version of narrative user experience, right? Everyone can be their own hero because they've joined some larger narrative to which they feel they're, entrepreneurs seeking out, some kind of upward mobility against establishments. I have journey in quotation marks there because according to a recent news report, this is the most overused English word of the last year. So much advertising and things as everyone is redescribing what they do as a journey somewhere. It's become a kind of, buzzword. Srinivasan is good on this again, and I won't read all of the details from her essay on the left here, but what she is very insightful about is the way people are fighting over English loving it and hating it at the same time. Because of course, everyone on this call will know how vexed its relationship is to the history of India and recent decades, and its place, as a spanning language between North and South and things, let alone in the classroom. But it's part of something that's also a social media issue, which is people writing themselves into larger narratives, like, say, that the Trump people who stormed the Capitol, or recently the young man who, based on conversations with a chat bot, wanted to kill the Queen of England, right? So these are, very volatile times based in language politics and social media. So I'm going to leave it that way, because I'd like to hear what people have to say. And again, I offer this, most humbly, because you all will know much more of the interesting politics and dynamics. And I'd like to hear from people about other works they might know, or please ask me about some that I've already mentioned. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That was actually very interesting in terms of how you brought together so many different ideas and linked to reading, to literature, interactive reading. And I think we already have a couple of questions on the chat box. Maybe I'll wait for a few more minutes for others to think about it, post some questions. In the meantime, maybe a quick pulling together of some thoughts based on what you had said. We've been talking about social media and its relationship to literature, and some big, large ideas that have been jumping out at me listening to you speak is this characteristic of social media as interactive, as participatory, and this form of the structure of social media, where you ended by saying you're writing yourself into the media platform and the writing space itself, and that causes some amount of agency. But then if I'm linking it back to an earlier point you made about the guilt that comes in and the need for bibliotherapy. So it seems to be a very tense, paradoxical space that is enabling a certain democracy of ideas, but that's also leading to a certain change in understanding literature and understanding culture, in the reading habits, in the access to it. And a few thoughts again that are coming here is one about the very ubiquitousness of literature when we think of it in relationship to social media. So generally, we've always been thinking of literature as, say, a canonical discipline, as something that is academic and not connected to reality. But this intervention with social media seems to be making it a part of our lives. So there is one kind of tension that comes in there. And this has a direct impact, in fact, to a couple of questions that have also come on the chat box about the reading habit. How is it actually impacting reading habits? So maybe I'll just read out a couple of these questions here. I think Dr. Vinod has asked, how can a teacher in the classroom act as a facilitator in the age of social media, especially when its use is so rampant? And a comparable question from Yogesh Singla about how can students be motivated to read literature in such a scenario? And I'm just wondering whether you want to respond to these questions, especially within the context of what you've been stating.
Sure. No, happy to do so. And again, I want to say, as someone in a classroom constantly, essentially negotiating with my students about writing and how to get writing, here's where I think social media is actually a good introduction to get them to write more complex things. And that is because the way I think of it, the great book I can recommend is called Uncreative Writing by Kenneth Goldsmith, the avant-garde author. He's been in trouble lately for kind of some of the things he's said. But anyway, he has a very interesting book called Uncreative Writing. And his point in it is to take social media and sort of think through the sociality of how people interact. And so let me put it this way. His main object is never look at a blank piece of paper or a blank screen. Like this idea of like writer's block is a self-inhibiting problem. And so write anything, recopy something else, like whatever gets you started in writing and thinking. And it might be by like reposting someone else's post or actually, and like he means it literally, like you might recopy someone else's post, like write it word for word. Anything that gets the creative juices flowing. You don't want to end there, but it might be a useful way to start, is to use what social media is good at, which is getting people interacting with others, right? Even if it's mostly posting about yourself, but that interaction is a way to hook people into producing writing. And if that gets the students started, then fine. Why try to fight it? And again, as a parent of a teenager, I know you're not going to be able to tamp it down. What you can do is try to channel it, right? So take the energy involved in social media connection and direct it to a different object.
Actually, a very powerful idea, especially with respect to the novel that you mentioned about AI being used to write a novel. And that's already causing a lot of crisis in creative writing departments about what is it that we are actually teaching people to write creatively.
Yeah.
This definitely helps to know. Thank you, John, for that. I think there are a few other questions about reading itself, and I feel this point is an important one, especially with respect to ELTAI's own reading initiative on just starting reading. So this is a project that ELTAI has done, and I think several questions here are coming from how can we, for instance, get students interested in reading physical books. So Lawrence asked, does it suggest that printed books of future literature will no longer be available? How do we get people to not get distracted and nourish the habit of physical reading in the present situation when digital obsession is taking over? This is Mr. Srinivas Darshan. And I think the idea of distraction that comes with social media in terms of reading and its erosion of a deep reading practice seems to be one major thread across several of the questions that the participants have written about. So if you want to address that in some way.
Yeah, I wish I had a good solution to that. I mean, I agree. I don't want to, be too optimistic with the idea that because people are reading lots of short things all the time, that's a substitute for depth. We're all literature scholars, and aware as scholars and teachers, you have to commit the time and sit and read it, kind of end to end. And so I do say that a lot in my classrooms, that there are times when you have to switch, essentially from one form of reading, which is constant kind of skimming and short form, and commit to depth. What I'm less worried about is as long as they have a way of annotating. Yes, many of my students don't buy print versions of works, but we actually take time in class where I ask them how they're annotating what's on a screen. So if they're reading a PDF, what do they use to highlight? How do they mark it up? And now again, I don't think it's a substitute for handwriting lines in books, right? That kind of extra tactile practice burns it into our brains differently. So I agree that's best. Now, again, maybe that's still only a legacy of the fact that we all did it. That we had print works that we marked up by page, by hand. If it's possible for students to use electronic means and bookmark and highlight and it works for them, then I'm kind of agnostic as long as it works. And I shouldn't presume that everyone needs to do it the way we've inherited it the last few decades, right? So I don't know. I do understand it's a constant negotiation with our students about how best to get them to internalize deep reading and comprehension. Now, I guess the last thing I'd say about it is going from the annotation, let's say it's on a screen and they're highlighting, how can they take that back outward to start their own writing in depth and thinking? That's a harder proposition. And I don't know if you are seeing it in your classes. In mine, the good students still write great essays. The others, maybe half the class are struggling with anything that demands more than simple sentences or simple tenses, because that's what they see in social media, right? When they're posting back and forth, they're always writing, they're always reading, but they're not doing it with complex sentences, and they're not doing it for potential audiences that they don't know. This is one of the other things we as writers understand, is the rhetoric of audience. So if you're constantly posting to other people you already know, you write differently, right? You're not aware of like unknown audiences and what's expected then. So that's something we have to work on. I agree. In my classes, you can't model composition writing on social media posts always.
That's so there is in fact one more comment here which is interesting with respect to the exposure to Chinese and Thai literature, for instance. And I think it ends by saying they might not be reading books per se, but they're definitely more exposed to larger cultural issues through social media. And that actually sort of brings me to that earlier idea of literacy itself. Is it just about reading and writing, or is there more to literacy in terms of understanding cultures as a cultural literacy context?
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
if,
totally agree. And, many on this call will be even better, much more literate about it than I, but I'm a big believer in reading really widely world literature. Now, again, to me, it's, got to be in English. I've had years and years of French, so I can read French pretty well, and a few years of Chinese studies. So but not very good. And I don't read any Indian languages, unfortunately. But you all know that, exposure to other traditions through translation, is a way of expanding theory of mind, knowing more complexity about others, these kinds of things that are, again, the contrast with so much social media is you're writing to people, even if it spans beyond your initial intent, you are writing to people you sort of already know, right? And so people get narrowcast, and they narrowcast themselves into certain kinds of publics. If you read world lit, and some of the greatest novels I've read in recent years, one is Romanian, translated from Romanian, called Solenoid. The great novel. A great Thai novel called The Understory. Right? I wouldn't know these at all, except thank God for translators, who work across these. Amazing work coming out of Latin America and Mexico lately. Fernanda Melchor is, an amazing author. So these are works that help us and help our students expand their worlds. So, yeah, I don't know what to say, except that yes, we ought to read more widely and get our students to read more widely.
So I think we have time for maybe one last question. There's an interesting one here. This age of creativity, this is Ms. Nagalakshmi. In this age of creativity coded in algorithms, how should the teacher develop the students for coding the creativity? Should we shift from developing creativity to coding it?
To coding it? Or, yeah.
Coding it.
Oh, coding. Yeah. That's a great question. I'm really interested in the way algorithms function, because keep in mind, and I point out to my students, I like to be the person who reminds them that there's nothing new under the sun. It's like, if you use a sonnet rhyme scheme like Shakespeare, you're using a kind of algorithm. It's like it has to end with particular rhyme. You've made a little cage to put things in. Algorithms can do it in automated form and, very quickly, but it's like, in some sense, rule setting is part of what literature has always been, like rhyme patterns and alliteration and things like that. So if you cast it to your students as, here's the latest version of something people have been doing for a long time, it sometimes helps, because it's like, one, they can see continuity, and two, they can take some credit for, wow, this is really new, but it's something that I could learn because others have done it differently in the past. The final thing I'll say about it, in the interest of time, I just want to say there are interesting examples you can use in a classroom. I highly recommend a poem called Taroko Gorge, Taroko, Taroko Gorge, Gorge. This is a place in Taiwan, but it's in a short Python-based poem. It's like a repeating structure, a nature poem. You just open it in a browser and it kind of scrolls. It's totally free and available. Just Google Nick Montfort, the author, Montfort, Nick Montfort, Taroko Gorge. Google it. It'll be your first hit. Let it run on the page. What I've done is had my students take the source code, and you can just open it up in a editor, change some of the words around, and like make the poem do different things. It's a really fun exercise for them because you could, you know, change the color, change the font, you know, things like that, put different words in. And it's only like 60 lines of code, so it's easy to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. I think we can, Dr. Lalita, if you would like to come in now, or do we have more time?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I thank Dr. John Shanahan for shedding light on the shifts in Anglophone dynamics, the wonderful examples given by you. They help us in getting insightful thoughts on this topic. I, on behalf of ELTAI and all our participants, thank you for conducting such an engaging and interesting session. I am also thankful to Dr. Nishevita Jayendran for moderating the session and offering her expert remarks, summarizing the session and handling the Q&A sessions skillfully. For an event to be successful, a dedicated team is required. And there's a dedicated team. A special thanks to the organizing team for the work which they did tirelessly to ensure that this webinar goes on in a defined manner. Their hard work and commitment to promoting excellence in English language learning is really commendable. Last but not the least, a heartfelt thank to all the participants from abroad and from all the corners of India. Your active participation enriched this program. Participants, please don't forget to fill up the feedback form. Feedback link is already shared in the chat box. Take note that certificates will be issued only to school, UG and PG students, ELTAI members, and foreign nationals. PhD scholars are requested to take membership to avail the benefits of ELTAI programs. Dear participants, before I conclude, there are a few more announcements. Our next 123rd Insightful ELTAI webinar is scheduled on Sunday, June 30th, 2024. And it is titled as Interdisciplinary Approach to Language Learning. Dr. Vaishali Jundre from Symbiosis Skills and Professional University, Pune is the resource person for this talk. Dr. N. Usha will be the moderator, while Dr. Bonani Chakrabarti will host the webinar. Kevin, can we have the poster of this webinar?
There on the screen.
Registration details and additional information about this exciting webinar is available on the chat box and also on our website. Make sure to visit our website and keep an eye out for the updates so that you don't miss the chance to be a part of this exciting experience. The ELTAI is also going to organize the 18th International and 54th Annual Conference of ELTAI on exploring languages and literatures for evolving pedagogical practices, which is being jointly hosted by the Assam Royal Global University, Guwahati, and Sonapur College, Sonapur. It'll held from 23rd to 26th October 2024. The conference will host an array of events like plenaries, workshops, panel and roundtable discussions, symposia, paper presentations, poster presentations, book exhibitions, sightseeing, and cultural events. The website for the upcoming annual conference is available at www.eltaiconferences.in. We have just released the call for proposals for presentations, and we request you to go through the theme and sub-themes of the conference and encourage your colleagues, research scholars, and students to participate and present at the conference. Hope to meet you there. The last date to submit an abstract for presentation is 10th of September 2024. Please note this deadline as we are not going to extend it further under any circumstances. Now it's time for a group photograph. I request everyone to turn their videos on. I request all the participants to turn their videos on. Egan sir, Rahul sir.
Yeah, everybody please smile. Thank you so much.
With this, I, Dr. Lalita Bisain from Nagpur ELTAI chapter, sign off for today. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John, for taking your time out and